I-V-M.
Women are thieves and murderers.
That's gross misconduct.
Con artists, money launderers.
Criminal misconduct.
Financial fraud that's hard to track.
Takes some planning, but still misconduct.
Even breaching a contract.
Well, that's more civil though.
It's misconduct. Misconduct. We tell you all about women that suck. Things that make you say, what the? It's misconduct.
Hello, and welcome to the Misconduct Podcast. My name is Raghavi, and I am a lawyer.
And I'm Nisha, and I work in public relations.
And this is our podcast where we talk about Indian women that did some horrible, terrible stuff. Some women that got convicted, some that didn't, some just sort of disappeared over time. But these are the kind of stories that we thought everyone should hear about. Indian women that were criminals.
And we'll try to cover murderers, con women, bandits, white-collar criminals, political corruption, and maybe even some immigration fraud. Oh, by the way, Raghavi is my best friend, and she sits out of Bangalore, and I sit out of Chennai, so we'll be doing this remotely over Zoom.
Yay, technology. So today we will be looking at a woman who has come to be known as many things. She's the first of many things for India specifically. She is India's first convicted female serial killer.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of words. So you may have heard about her. She goes by many names, but her most famous moniker was the name Cyanide Mallika.
And Cyanide Mallika took the nation by storm in 2008 and 2009, where she was charged for killing several women. She got her name because she used cyanide to murder them, and she also entrapped these women, and mostly by sheer manipulation.
That's right. Mallika's modus operandi of sorts was that she would befriend all these women and she would promise them some sort of a cure for their terrible lives, mostly because she took the time out to get to know them and figure out things that were really bothering them or plaguing them. So she would promise them prayers to have a male child, for example, or cure their asthma or find a missing relative. And these women would trust her because that's just how good she was at this. And she would let her take them to far off temples, and before they realized it, she would poison them and then rob them.
And in early 2008, the police did some fantastic work, and they were able to catch her, I think, pretty much red-handed. The court initially issued the death penalty, which was then commuted to life imprisonment. And all of this obviously just threw the media in a frenzy.
Right. You have to remember that this was India's first many things, right? It was the audacity of a woman to not just kill a bunch of people, but also to be in the news for it. So I think there's also the additional factor that a lot of the media reporting that we sort of came across really showed that she planned a lot of this. And as we go through it, you'll sort of understand how cold-blooded all of this was.
I think it's really fitting that we start off our first episode and our first podcast with the first convicted female serial killer. I mean, I feel like this podcast has been in the works since forever. I think 2019 was one of those good old-fashioned drunken conversations, which are, as usual, about true crime and, I think, feminism.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is, in a very twisted way, it is a very feminist podcast. We're just trying to tell you that, women can be anything, you guys. You just have to put your heart to it. And yeah, I think this was Christmas 2019 when we were at that Christmas dinner at Beer Library in Bangalore.
Yes.
We were really drunk on mulled wine, and mulled wine is where a lot of my good ideas used to come from at the time. So I remember just a little before we had met, I had done a bunch of very random research because it just sort of got stuck in my head, and it was almost an ADHD sort of a thing for me. But essentially I was just researching about women in prison, especially a report that came out by the Indian Ministry of Women and Child Development. And only 5% of all of the people in jail constitute women across India. So I was kind of upset at that time because I was like, are women not committing crimes? Like, do we not trust ourselves enough? Do we not believe in ourselves enough that we can do this? Or are women so good at committing crimes that nobody is able to convict them?
Yeah.
It has to be one of these two. I mean, I'm really extrapolating. My methodology here is absolutely terrible, but it has to be these two guys. There's nothing else.
And I think that if you look at, Indian women who are criminals and those who've been covered extensively by the media, I think your mind first goes to maybe Indrani Mukherjee or maybe
Yep.
Fulan Devi, the bandit queen, or Gangubai, because there's a ridiculous movie being made with Alia Bhatt. But these are the famous ones, right? That's why we know them. Even our lady Cyanide Malika, she barely got as much coverage. There was like a burst of news in 2008, and that's pretty much it. But there's actually so much more to her story.
That's true. But like before we get into her,
Hmm.
this podcast is also about us. As is everything. Everything is about us. So a little something about us.
I think the best way to get this started off is we've been best friends since I think we were like 9 years old, and we grew up
Yep.
together and just primarily bonded over like Disney movies and Harry Potter, and that was pretty much our entire personality.
And Lizzie McGuire, because we went through puberty together. So of course we did. And I sort of got into true crime way before Nisha did. Sometime whenever it came out, I listened to the little podcast called Serial. It's a little tiny indie podcast. Not too many people listen to it. But I found that like I really enjoyed books and movies and TV shows that focused on like complex women with like goals and aspirations and intentions, right? And not that Nisha didn't, of course she did. It's just I really enjoyed the true crime angle of it in particular. And the thing is, in India, I never came across things that really look like true crime, talking about women who did it from a lens of like someone who understands the law and someone who understands like the media perception of women in general. So that sort of gave us the inspiration for this podcast. And we sort of wanted to talk about how, sure, I mean, women are products of their circumstances and stuff. Some of them just want to exact revenge, but that's not always the case, right? Some women end up becoming criminals for loads of reasons, and we really wanted to investigate that with this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes women become criminals because they've always wanted to. Some of them have deeply rooted motives, and sometimes it's just an easy way to scam someone. And I guess the point is that, women have agency, even in wrongdoing. And we would like to tell some of these women's stories. So, yeah, that's the basic idea of where this podcast came from. Not all drunk ideas are great, but apparently with enough research, some of them are.
Yeah, and we put in like a year and a half worth of research in this. So what we're going to be doing is we'll pick a woman for each episode. And of course, a criminal woman, not like any woman. We'll pick one for an episode. We'll look into the crimes that they did or allegedly did, because I don't want to get my pants sued off of me. The media coverage around it at the time, which is really going to be Nisha's focus. This is just what she does. How law enforcement was involved, and whether or not these people were brought to justice, so to speak, and also like where they are today, if they're still around, or what happened in the last days of their lives. So basically, we'll paint you sort of like a word picture of the life and the crimes of some really, truly terrible Indian women. And we also want to like, since we've been doing this for so long, we want to make a quick shout out to IVM Podcast that made this happen despite the distance and just sort of giving us the creative freedom to do this in almost like this ridiculous, nonsensical way that we're doing it right now.
But yeah, on the other side of the break, we're going to tell you more about the woman of the hour, Cyanide Malika.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Misconduct Podcast. As you mentioned a little before the break, we sort of want to go into who Cyanide Malika was, where is she from, what did she do, why we're really talking about her. And to be really fair, there's not a lot that we know about her from when she was, younger, in the flush of youth. We know that she was born as Kempamma. This was sometime in 1965 in a village just outside Bangalore city. It's called Kagalipura. And today the village lies in the Bannerghatta National Park towards the south of Bangalore. She appears to have married a tailor at some point who was either abusive to her or he was upset with the kind of work she was doing. That reminds me. When I say the kind of work she was doing, she was involved in a chit fund for a really long time. And she lost a lot of money. And I think she and her husband were being really hounded by her creditors to get a return on their investments. And usually when you lose money,
So I guess there's a good reason for her husband to be upset with her.
I mean, but that is not a reason to like hit somebody. I don't know. Like that's just
No, not abuse.
yeah, of course. But I get why he's upset. That's fair. Yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, it looks like she was, when I say abuse, it looked like she was kicked out of her house, sometime in 1998, because that's when it was first reported that she came to Bangalore and she worked as for a bit as a domestic help in a bunch of apartments. So we know that she came to Bangalore she was around in the early 2000s, and that's really all we have in terms of a historical background. But juicy stuff. But in
The murderer.
in 2007, this is when Kempamma's killing spree really started. And by this point, in 1999, and this is alleged so far, she had a practice session, so to speak, when she killed a woman who was praying at a temple. Her name was Mamta Rajan. We don't know much else about this, but it's kind of easy for us to believe that she probably had the same MO as for the rest of them. We'll get into that in a little bit. In the year 2000 also, she was arrested for robbing a house and almost killing a resident in that house. And this also happened during a religious ritual. And because this was just an attempt to murder, she was jailed for about 6 months. That's about it. But in 2007, between October 10th and December 18th, which is a span of 3 months, she's believed to have killed 6 women.
So we have some information about this, and in no particular order, we know of Elizabeth, who was promised the return of her grandson, Yashodamma, who was told that there's a cure for her asthma, Renuka, she was told that she would have a son very soon, Muniamma and Pillamma, they were offered a chance to make a holy pilgrimage, Nagaveni, and she was promised a child. So although she would not be convicted, Mallika was not convicted of all of these crimes, primarily because there was very less evidence.
But there was enough evidence for us to understand what her process was. So, and this is a lot of extrapolation from what the police said and from case studies that we done, mostly high court decisions regarding, her eventual conviction. But this is essentially her MO, okay? She found a bunch of women who she realized were at a very weak moment. She either got to them by just speaking to them, by being kind to them, by just making friends with them, and just sort of like getting to know them, just slowly breaking down their walls. And she knew them sometimes for weeks and months, right? So she would befriend them. And once she got to know what sort of stuff bothered them, she would tell them that they could perform a ritual with her in some temple of some sort, and they would get a cure for whatever was bothering them. And luckily, all of these temples were always on the outskirts of Bangalore city, like really far out. Just like, hey, come, let me take you really far out to a place where literally nobody visits that temple. And once, obviously, they were away in that temple outside the city, she would kill them. How she killed them was particularly just distressing. Just as they were at their most vulnerable, usually just talking to her or getting prasadam from her or something, she would thrust cyanide in their mouths and then just watch them die. And then she would just disappear with whatever possessions they had. And let's just remember, it's not like she just aimed, she didn't pick a woman off the street and do this too. She was clearly smart enough that she was like, hey, this woman seems worth this effort because she likely has gold or money,
We actually know about her MO because the police were quoted in a lot of reports, and they were quoted saying that she would grasp the victim by the hair, pull her head back, and quickly thrust the cyanide into her mouth. So clearly you can see that, she had the will, she had the ability to do something like that, especially when I feel like you have so much time to reconsider. She's befriending these women. She could have reconsidered, but no, she chose to do this. This is not a crime of passion.
Right.
This is not a woman who's like a victim of her circumstance. No, she was an outright cold-blooded, vicious murderer, and she was convinced that she could get away with
She
it.
was convinced she'd get away with it, actually. That's very true because she did for the longest time,
For the longest time.
She did.
yeah.
And whatever misplaced confidence this was, it wasn't really, that misplaced really. And to sort of highlight just how brutal this was, one of the cases that we were able to sort of really read into was Muniamma, who was one of Mallika's last victims. Now, a lot of what we know about her and her relationship with Mallika is from her son, Anjanappa. So basically, Muniamma, she used to work at the Bangalore Agricultural University. She was well read, she wasn't like a simpleton or anything. She just happened to be extremely devout also. She loved visiting temples and stuff like that. So sometime in December 2007, a visitor turned up at her house. Her name was Lakshmi. And she and Lakshmi became friends. And a couple of days later, they went to this town a little further up north on 15 December 2007. So Muniamma had just told her son that she'd be away for 3 or 4 days. And her son had noticed that she was wearing a bunch of gold, her gold Mangalium chain, which is her, what's the word for it, Mangal Sutra, and a couple of other pieces of gold, right? So the thing is, when 2 days later, when Muniamma had not returned, Anjanappa was obviously worried, so he went to the police station to lodge a complaint. A few days later, the police turned up with a bunch of photos of a deceased woman in a small room, okay, and the room looked like a lodge of sorts. And of course, Anjanappa, it's her son, so he recognized her immediately. And the police informed him that she had been killed, most likely by the companion that came with her, right? And this is when Anjanappa noticed that the gold ornaments that she was wearing was missing. And the police also confirmed that there was no gold found at the scene of the crime. The worst part of all of this is how they found the body. So the secretary of that temple, Mr. Madhava, he recalls Muniamma coming with a woman named Lakshmi, and they had booked a room for this day. But the room was pre-booked. It was paid in advance for at least 2 days. And Muniamma was killed in that room early morning on the first day.
Oh God.
So the secretary only found her body 2 days later because he didn't care. They had paid rent for the house when he could smell a really foul stench coming from the room.
That's just so sad.
Yeah, and that's how they found her. Like, I can't even say that is not premeditated at this point because she, like Lakshmi, so to say, she planned in advance to pay just enough that she knew nobody would even find the body for a couple of days, And
Giving her enough time to get away.
exactly. And get away she did. Well, briefly she did. And the thing is, a lot of other women across Karnataka were killed in a very similar way by administering cyanide into their mouth. Usually, they would also find food like prasadam or something in the stomachs of the victims, so they knew that's how it was administered. And all their gold and money and belongings would be completely gone from the room. It would just be the body that was lying there. So this is like a pattern that eventually was very, very clear to the police by this time.
That's a really heavy story.
I'm sorry.
It's just, I know, it's just very painful, like, thinking about the son who had to identify his mom, and being in that situation. And then the whole idea of cyanide poisoning, right? Because it's supposed to be very painful. And I think it's important to understand like a little bit more about the murder weapon, because whenever I think about, the cyanide portion of Cyanide Malika, the two questions that keep coming up is why cyanide and how did she get this cyanide? Right. So we did read a couple of articles and a couple of stories which are talking about how she used to work in a jewelry store.
Right.
And potassium cyanide is something that you use to polish and buff stone and jewelry and things like that. So it's highly likely that she maybe procured it from there. That's what the police reports tell us, at least. One of the media reports also mentioned some LTT connection, but this seems to be very unfounded.
I don't know either. Let's get back to this. Do you know how cyanide works though?
Yeah.
Because I haven't really... I know it works very quickly, but that's really all I know.
So I have some idea of just like doing some research. So cyanide is basically acts as an inhibitor of cellular respiration.
Sure,
Okay.
I understood that.
Okay. Basically, it blocks the oxygen flow to your blood cells. So I think the easiest way to explain this is that, when you're exercising and then sometimes you get like a cramp
Right.
on your leg.
Ugh.
Yeah. So that actually happens because there's not enough oxygen flowing to the cells, and lactic acid builds up around those muscles. So cyanide does this cramp like for your entire body, and it's happening really, really fast. And within minutes, you lose consciousness and you're just brain dead.
Okay.
That's how it works.
That was horrifying. Like, interesting. Please continue.
But so yeah, cyanide is actually naturally occurring in a lot of foods as well. Apple seeds, for example, they contain a substance called amygdalin.
Okay.
And when you chew it and digest it, it releases cyanide into your bloodstream. But do not worry, the US Center for Disease Control has said that you need to finally chew like 200 apple seeds, which is like I don't know, some 20, 30 apples to gather enough cyanide for a
That's
fatal dose. So
fine.
it's not
I've
really
eaten 2 apples this year and it's already like June. I'll be okay. It's
Exactly.
fine.
Exactly. So yeah, so it's not really a practical way to extract cyanide, and I can't say this enough, but do not try this at home. We do not recommend this method.
Yeah, I don't even think you would die of like cyanide poisoning. I'm sure eating 20 apples is likely not good for you.
We'll just give you straight up
Yeah,
diarrhea. That's what will
so
happen.
dumb. Please don't try this at home. This is just some stupid thing we saw on the internet. Please, please, please don't try this at home. But now that you bring that up, the fact is they didn't really figure out where the cyanide came from. Instead, like if ideally if you had like cyanide is a controlled substance, because it can kill you. So if I don't know if the police had maybe made an effort to sort of figure out where she could have procured this. I'm not necessarily sure how spread across the entire city this really is, right? But if they had some idea about it, maybe they could have started there to figure out how to search for her. Because a random person just walking into a jewelry store and saying, "Give me some cyanide," is not very common. So she must have either worked at a jewelry store or something of that nature.
Yeah,
or a chemist,
exactly.
something. I understand that it'll be like very difficult to pick up those leads, but that's not what the police went for. The police instead managed to find her because of something stupid that she did. So, no, wait for it. I'll tell you, this will piss you off on a fundamental level, but I'll tell you. So, she was caught on 31st December 2007. I remember this very well because my dad saw headlines of this early January 2008. He was like, "Whoa, she got caught," and I didn't care. I was, I was really into like Justin Timberlake at the time. I don't know. So I didn't care at all. But this is like really, really big news. So 31st December 2007 is when she was arrested. She was about 43-ish years old at this time. And the police said that they were able to track Malika down because they found her using one of the mobile phones of one of her victims and they were able to trace her location.
Oh, come on, dude. This pisses me off so much. Like, this is the person who spent months befriending someone to plan their murder. But, like, come on, this is phone stealing 101. When you pick up a phone, you throw the SIM card and then maybe switch off your location.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what the Deputy Commissioner of Police also said. Mr. K.V. Sharad Chandra. He was quite proud of it. He was just like, she was a tough nut to crack, but, we found her because, because of this. He was also quoted as saying that she was driven more by the robbery motive than any like psychopathic tendencies, because by this time they'd already caught her. And this is important to remember, she confessed to the murders. She didn't really wait it out. She was just like, "Oh, well." I mean, I think she really realized the physical evidence against her was so overwhelming that...
Well, duh.
Yeah, well, duh. So at that point, she was just like, I mean, we had a good run. And she just confessed to it, right? So all through early 2008, there were so many reports that started coming out of the people that she killed, because by this point, there were police stations in Bangalore, in Tumkur, in Kolar, and they all had faced similar cases, and they were all waiting to interrogate her. And all of these occurred in their respective jurisdictions. So at this point, it's just like a solid collation of information to sort of really nail her down to the crime.
Actually, I think kudos to the police departments of various jurisdictions of like speaking to each other, because that usually doesn't happen. And like, I think a good example is like, Veerappan, right? He was very happily going across 3 different forests between Tamil Nadu and Karnataka and Kerala. And he was able to escape because the police for the longest time weren't having conversations. And then the reason he got caught is because they were finally like, "Listen, guys, I think we need to work together." So, and I think that kind of that cooperation, that coming together, really worked out for the police across Tumkur and Kolar and all of that, because that's how they were able to like track her down and catch her.
That's actually really wholesome, the way you put that. There's no I in teamwork. There's no we in teamwork. There's a me. There's a me in teamwork. Aha, it's all about me. I knew this. So on this note, guys, we're going to take a little break. We'll come back to you guys to sort of discuss what happened after this. Like, Okay, she got caught, but did she go to court? How did we find out about her? Just a bunch of cute little stuff after this, so please stay tuned.
Welcome back from the break, and let's go on to talk about the media reports on Saina and Mallika's methods. So, the reason why we were very interested in her and how we came to know more about her is, like Raghavi mentioned, her dad went through a lot of those articles that came out in early 2008, 2009, because there was so much spoken about her at that time. She was the first, right? So, there was a lot of conversations. And through all of these reports, one of the things that we seemed to be like a thread was that she was just completely ruthless about the whole affair. Her victims were just a mean to an end, and all she really cared about was the money. And another thing that we find out from these reports is that she never used the name Kempama. And it appears like the police didn't really know her name until they actually caught her and they found it on her voter ID, which she decided to carry on her person. I guess this is the same person who decided to keep the phone with the SIM card and the location on. But yeah, so a lot of the eyewitnesses have said that she used names like Mallika, Lakshmi, Jayamma, Savitramma, and Shivamoga.
And this is really important now that you brought this up, because a lot of this adds together, like, to sort of make us understand why she was convicted in 2009. And surprise, surprise, she was convicted for the mountain of physical evidence that she had that was so against her in every which way. Now, I just thought it'd be a good idea to sort of like extrapolate what you just mentioned about premeditation, right? Because that's exactly what the Indian Penal Code talks about when it comes to punishment for murder versus anything else. So Mallika was booked under Section 300 of the Indian Penal Code. So it sort of highlights the circumstances under which an act that a person does would constitute murder. So the punishment for murder is imprisonment for life or death. It really depends on the circumstances. One of the questions that comes before pretty much any court when a victim is killed is whether the case is one where the killing happened, you know, sort of like because of a sudden or grave provocation. What that really means is, for example, Nisha, and God forbid, I hope this doesn't happen, if Nisha ran at me with a knife and I shot her with a gun that I happen to have on hand, I don't know. This metaphor is really falling apart. Nisha runs at me with a gun, with a knife, and I shoot her with a gun. And I cause her death, right? So my reaction is based on some kind of provocation. This is called culpable homicide not amounting to murder. And the punishment for something like this is usually between 10 years to life imprisonment, depending on the circumstance. But if I decide that Nisha did a bad job on this episode of the podcast and I just don't like her and I find her voice annoying, I don't know, and I decide I want to kill her. So I go out and I buy a gun, I practice with said gun, and I tell Nisha, hey girl, do you want to come over for margaritas? And then she comes home and then I shoot her. Now that is murder. So there is no provocation aspect there. I'm straight up just like, hey, come over. I would like to kill you now. So the courts didn't buy that Mallika didn't plan her murders. And of course, she also confessed. So that was really helpful. But essentially in 2009, she was convicted by a sessions court in Tumkur for the murder of Muniamma. And later on, she would also be convicted for the murder of Nagaveni. Both of these convictions were the best ones that the prosecutors could use at the time because of the overwhelming amount of evidence. And both cases came with the death penalty. So, yeah. I don't know, man. It doesn't, for me, it's the death penalty is really, really severe. It's not really something that I would just hand out because I was like, she sucked. You know, I wouldn't do it that way. I don't think that's really fair.
Really?
I don't know.
I mean, obviously, you wouldn't give it out so frivolously, but in this situation, when there's so much information and so much evidence to what she has done, I would believe that it's probably justified, right?
I guess. I've just also seen other cases where it's been infinitely worse. Like the motivation has been, sure, this was also, I guess, property in a way, but dude, there are cases where children have been killed, you know, like people have been like brutally sexually assaulted and then murdered. And like there are some cases that will truly just chill you, like your blood will run cold. I get it, but I personally don't really believe that Even imprisonment is not something I fundamentally believe in. But you know what? This is a very heavy. Yeah, let's talk about
that's a lot.
let's talk about this some other time, because I feel like imprisonment in particular is just really focused on, you're not really making anybody feel like they can be introduced back into society as a good person. So I don't know. It's just all of those things. But back to this case.
I think what you need is the good place hell loop, whatever loop that they have.
The hell? Oh, no. That's I would be in the bad place. There is
Oh yeah, 100%.
There is no way.
There's no question.
I don't deserve the good
I'm probably
place.
the Janet from the bad
Oh
place.
my god, I love her. She's really hot. Okay, we're getting a little sidetracked here. What I really wanted to say was Malika appealed this decision, which is where she got the death penalty.
The death
yes,
penalty.
of course. Because you can. That's you can do that. That's just a right that you have. So in August 2012, the Karnataka High Court decided to roll back her death sentence and instead awarded her life imprisonment. So like I said, they didn't really believe it was like a rarest of rare case, really, to justify
I suppose.
taking a life, as punishment. They just felt it was really excessive for that situation. But the court did say, and like I thought this was something that's important to highlight, they indicated that her acts indicates like a disturbed mind. Like it's not a balanced sense of mind. But one more thing that I thought was really important, I thought you would like really find this interesting, is that she confessed to the killings. They observed that, right? They said she confessed to it.
Yeah.
But she also turned up in court and said she deserved to be hanged. But
Oh.
she requested leniency because she had children.
Huh. Well, I suppose that's how you would react, right? If you're facing down the death penalty, you would go kind of cuckoo and you would like say, no, yes, I deserve to die. And then suddenly realize that, oh, this is scary. No, I have children. Please don't kill me.
I guess I actually don't know I would have loved to read her cross-examination. That would have been brilliant. I don't even know if she was afforded a defense lawyer that was good enough to be able to carry this case forward for her. Especially because of the kind of conflicting statements that she did give. But I kind of get where you're coming from. I guess if you're just sitting there having a court, like a bunch of three older gentlemen decide whether you're going to die,
Yeah.
I guess you would say whatever you need to get out of it. So yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. I don't know. But there's one thing that I did want to sort of highlight before we get into like what Malika is doing today. There is a book by Pinky Anand. Pinky Anand is an Indian lawyer and she's a senior advocate of the Supreme Court. She also served for a while as the Additional Solicitor General of India. So she has a book called The Trials of Truth. And she dedicates a small section of her book to Malika's motivation specifically. And I thought I should just read this out because it's very interesting. So here goes. This case was in direct contrast to our traditional thinking that women resort to gruesome crimes only when forced to or under extreme circumstances that deeply affected the psyche. These cases seem to defy the traditional gender roles and the way we perceive them. The idea that women can kill seems to be a difficult one to digest for our conscience, but a mere look at these instances proves the opposite. Aha! This is the central thesis of our podcast. Done. It's
true,
over.
that's
Podcast
true.
over. Let's go home. It's done.
But yeah, this is all like really heavy stuff, right? So I just wanted to quickly offset that with a tiny palate
Yeah,
cleanser.
please. Say something nice. I can't.
Okay. So when I was reading up about this case and looking up like media reports and all that, I managed to come across a trailer for a Kannada Cyanide Malika movie,
Hey!
which apparently came out in Feb 2021.
I saw this, yeah.
Yeah, she supposedly.
I mean, not the movie. I saw the trailer, sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering how you understood. But yeah, she supposedly meets a Cyanide Mohan and they try to outwit each other. So Cyanide Mohan was this other guy who killed like 20 women between 2003 and 2009, also in Karnataka. The MO is incredibly similar to Kempamma, where he used like seduction or promises of marriage. And then, of course, murdered these women with cyanide. He was also initially sentenced to death, by the way.
Promises
But
of
in-
marriage, huh? Was he cute? What's his deal?
Oh my God. Nope. Not happening.
I don't know. Dude, you know how, like, actually, I don't really understand the appeal of Ted Bundy. A lot of, like, this American series. Did you just gasp?
Listen. Okay, actually, here's the thing. I watched the movie where Zac Efron played Ted Bundy, and Zac Efron is
No,
really
then
cute.
you
And
fell
that's
for
what I
Zac
thought.
Efron. You didn't fall for Ted
Sure.
Bundy. But I don't know. I mean, like, this Mohan Kumar sounds like the kind of dude who I would be into. I don't know. Like, not that I would necessarily be into it. What I'm saying is, if I was PMSing and some dude
God.
walked up to me and just was like, "Hey, girl," I don't know, I might fall for it, especially if he was like, there's a Tamil word for this. I don't know if you know this word because it's disgusting to say out loud, but the word is dadiya. Have you heard?
Oh, God.
Have you heard of that? So it's like
So just like
thick man, like just thick boy, like all chest and like a smattering of chest hair. He stands like a bear, you know what I mean? So you know what, I'm really sidetracked here. All I'm trying to say is, if I was in a place where I felt like a little vulnerable and this dude came up to me, I would fall for it. So I don't fault any of these women. I fault Cyanide Mohan. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, duh. Yeah, Cyanide Mohan is a terrible
I just want to
person.
clarify.
And I'm sure he managed to convince them with his wit and charm and apparently dadiya looks. So, but yeah, so, I mean, but this is just for the movie. Kempamma and Mohan Kumar never actually met in real life.
Oh.
This is just some weird horror-based meet cute or whatever. But I don't understand why we continue to romanticize rubbish like this.
That's disgusting.
It is disgusting. But also, Kempamma was killing from the ages of like 35 to 45 or
Right.
something. But in this movie, she's some like hot 20-something-year-old.
Shut up.
So it's all for marketability. Obviously, then what else? They'll cast a 30-year-old and one like young man, is it? No way.
I mean,
Don't you know that women expire like after 30?
they just dissolve.
That's it. Next year.
They just dissolve once they turn 30. I have like, well, I just have a few days left for that. But they just dissolve. Then they're out. It's over.
Exactly.
I kind of understand. I mean, I don't understand. It's fundamentally a really terrible practice. But you know what would have been really cool in a role like this? I'm still thinking. I didn't actually have an answer. But no man, she's not South Indian. Vidya Balan.
Vidya Balan?
Yep, Vidya
Yeah.
Balan would have been great at this. Even Radhika Apte, a little younger, so not really fair, but Vidya Balan would have killed it at this.
She would have
Yeah.
killed it. Yeah. She would have been a great Malika.
Man.
Again, we don't want to romanticize this.
Fair.
She's a terrible person.
But terrible as she is, I think she's kind of having a great time right now. Because so she is is a cute little segue into figuring out where Malika is nowadays. She is, of course, she still got her life imprisonment sentence. It's not like they were like, you're not gonna die, so you can leave. They didn't say that. She's in the Bangalore Central Jail. She will be there for the rest of her life. But Kempamma was in the news a little while ago, sometime in 2017. Do you know what happened in 2017? Wrong answers only. Go.
Thor Ragnarok released in 2017.
Okay.
And I was very happy because I got to see Tom Hiddleston on the
Oh, he
screen.
got a much bigger role in that movie. I agree. He was, and he put on a little muscle. I kind of get it. Yeah. But great wrong answer. What I was actually looking for is in 2017, Shashi Kala, who was a Tamil politician, she was convicted of a series of things. But basically, those of you who don't know, VK Shashikala, she's a Tamil politician. She was formerly very close to Jayalalitha, the late Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, and Amma, as we all know her. So in 2017, she was found guilty of holding assets disproportionate to her income. There's a lot around this, more on her some other time.
Yeah.
But it turns out Kempamma was a huge fan of Shashikala. So she was really ecstatic that Shashikala was sent to the Bangalore Central Jail. Like, she was excited, and the media picked up on this. They were like, hey, this is adorable. So there were a lot of rumors, okay? And these are all not real. Like, I just read them on like random forums. Some say that she annoyed Shashikala a lot. Some other reports said that she could have been a threat to Shashikala's life. But I think overall, it just looked like she was just trying to be nice to her. She would bring her food. Just like little things that Shashikala wouldn't have to inconvenience herself in the prison, It's just stuff like that.
That's so cute.
It is. It really is.
I think Shashikala was released from Central Prison,
Yeah.
right? Sometime in Jan 2021,
That's right.
apparently. I remember reading that she was temporarily moved to Victoria Hospital because she had
that's
COVID.
right. That's right. This is actually around when we were writing these episodes. I remember us, like, we read this up because you were like, "Hey, Shashikala, what is she up to?" And we're like, "Oh, she has COVID." That was terrible.
It's okay. I'm sure she's fine
I'm
now.
sure she's fine. I mean, Victoria Hospital is great, but I mean, she's not in the jail anymore. What is Malika gonna do?
Oh, so sad for Malika. She lost her.
That is quite
BFF.
sad. Actually, I feel genuinely bad for her. I don't know.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I see you disagree, but okay.
She murdered 6 people. I do
That's
not feel
fair.
bad for
I
her.
feel like we really humanized her for no reason in the last few minutes. So I'm really sorry about that. But to distract from what we did, that was a little terrible. I think we didn't really talk at all about why we really picked Malika. I mean, yes, she's the first female serial killer. It's our first episode, blah, symbolism.
Yes.
But the real reason we picked her, and this is a genuinely, like, I thought it was quite heartwarming. During my research, I came across an RTI request. For those who don't know, RTIs are citizen requests for access to public information. These are governed under the Right to Information Act. So how it usually works is a government agency that a citizen writes to has to respond within a month for whatever questions that they've asked. If they can't give you an answer, you're not happy with their answers, there's an appeal process. It's a whole procedure. So the idea is publicly available information belongs to the public. I should ask for it. So there was an RTI filed by a Mr. Srinath of Ernakulam district in Kerala. So he wrote to the City Civil Complex Court in Bangalore. He asked for a copy of the judgment in the famous Cyanide Malika case. Exactly these words. And a bunch of other things as well, but specifically this. And the information officer at the court complex rejected his request. So, yeah, so he's not wrong. There is a procedure for this. What you usually do is you ask for the case. You have the case file. You say, this is the case file that I want, and you provide the case number.
Oh.
But the sad part is, one of the other questions Mr. Srinath had asked is, what is the case number?
Oh no! I know. That's so sad.
I feel so bad for this guy. And the thing is, like, this was rejected. His appeal was also rejected. And I feel bad for this dude because on a more fundamental level, think about it. You as someone who, you know, is the information officer at the City Civil Court Complex likely already know which case he's referring to.
Yeah.
I mean, even if it's not the right courthouse, you know. And I feel like they could have gone a little bit out of their way to help him. It's just really, really mean. So, I don't know, man. He just wanted to know what was happening in this case. And obviously the media coverage at the time was not particularly helpful because they weren't going into... they weren't going into the specifics of the case. Till date, I can't find one cross-examination that, you know, that she had to face or the witnesses had to face. So I totally get where he was coming from. He just wanted to know what was happening, you know.
Yeah, so this episode is for Mr. Srinath of Ernakulam district. So if you're out there, we heard you, boo. We felt this. This episode is for you.
Yay. And that really is the end of the episode. It's quite a ride, man. So much information packed in this. And we sort of figured that, I don't know, to help you catch up, we might do a little musical number to sort of recap everything that we covered. It's something we're thinking we'll do every episode. It's just something we like doing.
If we can.
We shall. What is this? Be positive, Nisha. We shall do this. So, Nisha, would you like to take over?
Sure.
Auntie, come with me. Temple's calling. Get your jewelry and your diamonds. Don't be scared of me. I'm just a friend. Get you to the room, then give you some motichur. Yeah, the laddu. Then the cyanide takes over you. I'll be honest, I was just greedy. No motive, just wanted your money. But they caught me. They found me standing at a bus stop. It's a lesson, kids, turn your location off. Try to get away, but they caught my bluff. You see, they got me wearing all the stolen stuff. You know there's some good news. I'm in jail but didn't get the news. I am still a killer though.
And that brings us to the end of our first episode. We hope you enjoyed listening to this as much as we enjoyed making it.
You can find all of our show notes on our Substack or our website. It'll be provided in the episode description. Our Instagram handle is also in there. Please go follow us for any future updates.
And we'll see you again on the next episode of Misconduct.